My name is Audrey Wright. Thank you so much for joining me for an excerpt today. Today, we begin our journey into second violin excerpts, and we start off with the second movement of Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony is one of those excerpts that just sneaks up on us. As a second violin excerpt, I would say it's probably one of the most demanding physically that we have. So it's important to keep in mind ways of opening up and staying relaxed throughout the entire excerpt as we work on it. The things we're going to be looking out for and focusing on are clarity, articulation, intonation and clarity of the left hand as well. And like I said, really it's all about how to stay open and relaxed in the body so we can maintain a really great core sound throughout the entire excerpt. Starting from the beginning of this excerpt, we have to remember that this is a really important second violin excerpt because in the context of the whole piece, the second violins start off this big fugue moment in the second movement of this symphony. They start off basically alone with the exception of a big chord and the rest of the orchestra. And so it's really important to start off with great articulation and a really steady sense of pulse from the beginning. So I play this stroke basically right at the balance point of my bow, and I essentially use very little bow. It's a very controlled bow stroke, and it's kind of maximum articulation with minimal effort. That's what I'm going for. So in slow motion, I'm really going for a great start to each note. And then after the initial attack of each staccato, I'm trying to release my hand, my whole upper body really, so that I stay loose and that the sound doesn't start crunching or get tense. So you'll notice that every note has a bite on it. Every note is clear and articulate, but I'm really trying to stay as relaxed as possible physically. You can't see from this video, but my feet are a little bit wider than about a foot apart, so I really have a nice kind of solid stance while I'm playing this excerpt, and I want to stay grounded as much as possible physically. So I'm just staying right here at the balance point, not using a whole lot of bow. And I'm really trying to also go for full bow hair. And that way, the sound will stay full and resonant while you're going for this highly articulate stroke. Now, in the fifth bar of this passage, it's always a question of how long to play these quarter notes. They are quarter notes with dots, and of course they're offset by these pick up eighth notes. So the question is, how short do we play those quarter notes? I like to think of them as a resonant eighth note. So there's a little bit of a follow through with my bow here, but I'm imagining that it's been notated as an eighth note so that I'm not playing anything too long. We don't want it to be too long because the rest of the orchestra, the other string section, is bouncing off of our downbeat. So it's kind of a back and forth feeling, and so that's why we don't want to be too long with these quarter notes. And again, really starting from the string, having good bite on these eighth notes in particular is really important. So that everything is sharp and clear. So, you know, a good practice technique for this whole excerpt is one that I've mentioned in previous videos before, and that is to put your metronome on the half note, but you're going to imagine that the metronome beat is actually on the off beats. So it helps us maintain a sense of pulse in our practice while kind of building in a really strong sense of subdivision within us. So I'm going to just demonstrate this so you see what I'm talking about. I'm going to put my metronome on 104 to the half note here. And I'll just demonstrate what this sounds like from the beginning of the excerpt. And this is something that you'd want to start off slowly and then pick up speed in your practice. But here's what I mean by this. So that sort of thing really helps maintain, like I said, a strong sense of pulse, but being on the offbeat, it's more of a syncopated sense of rhythm, and that's always what we want to feel rhythmically. I think the best sense of pulse that we can have is one that is taking into consideration syncopations in the music, because that keeps musical line kind of going, and it keeps us in tempo without feeling too dragged down in any way, or mechanical or robotic. But I would really, suggest trying out this practice technique, starting much slower than 104. This is 70 to the half note, for example. And in that way, you can really focus on clarity as well as good tempo and articulation, right? So practicing this slowly is very important for the sake of clarity. Now, going on from this section, tricky to kind of decide on a good fingering. There are certainly a few options that we could go with here, but I try to stay in kind of a combination of half position and first position for this first bar. And then I go to second position in this next bar. And then I shift down to first position on the second half of the bar. And then I stay on the A string here until the very last few notes. This helps with the bowing, I think, to make it as clean as possible, so we're not kind of skipping any strings and trying to make that clean. So that's my fingering. Maybe that's helpful for you. Now going on from rehearsal number 33, you know, I think it's so surprising, this excerpt, because of how unrelenting it is. Really, this figure comes back again and again. And, you know, the tendency is to maybe try to make it musical, to somehow back away from it sometimes. Maybe we're feeling a little bit fatigued physically, and so we want to back away from it. But this is a fugue, and it's a really intense one. So musically, we have to really just kind of go full speed ahead, full force ahead, and maintain this forte and the character that we established at the beginning. It does at 33 say sempre forte. So Rachmaninoff knows that perhaps we would be a little oversensitive here and try to back off, but it's okay to kind of maintain the forte that you started with at the beginning. So really just maintain this forte all the way through. Now it's okay to play with shapes in this phrase. So the lower, it's kind of good to bring out the pickup to each downbeat, so that we do have at least some shaping going on. That is still important, and we can bring that out. And with these string crossings, it's just going back and forth between two strings most of the time, but because of the nature of the stroke and kind of how aggressive it is very easy to catch other strings in the process, kind of diminishing the clarity of sound here. So you want to, again, practice this very slowly and work it up to speed so that you are focusing on very clear string crossings. And really making sure that your bow knows exactly what string it needs to be on. Of course, one can practice this with open strings. That is also very helpful. For example, the bars I just played would be played like this with open strings. Right? And so I'm really focusing on training my right hand to be exactly where it needs to be before even kind of adding the left hand into the mix. So then it becomes even clearer when we put everything together. There's kind of a good connection going on between both hands and a good coordination. So now I do retakes here so that I start each measure down bow. So those 3 bars I start down bow each time. Now here we have più crescendo written. You want to stay forte here. You don't want to make an audible decrescendo before the più crescendo, so you have space to build. But at a certain point, we have no more sound to produce in our instrument. So just be aware that you can kind of release the tension ever so slightly in the first bar or so of this più crescendo. So you give yourself a little bit of extra space to make the crescendo. I'll demonstrate what I mean here. I'll make that more in tune. So really, it's very minimal what I'm doing. I'm just releasing the sound ever so slightly in the first, say, bar of the più crescendo. And to help the crescendo grow, I'm actually using a little bit more and more bow on the quarter notes as I release them throughout the line of that crescendo. So more. So it's just kind of bigger and faster retakes that I'm doing, so that that release of the bow helps the sound carry even further as we make the crescendo. Going on from here, this next line for me is always the trickiest in terms of trying to get string crossing clarity. So just watch out for this one. It may be because we're feeling fatigued at this time. We've already played quite a few measures of this very tiring stroke. So remembering to stay open and to try to let the right hand relax and let the bow take care of the articulation as much as possible. It's really important here. So really, again, by staying in this balance point sweet spot, my bow is more prone to recreating this articulation that I start off with. And I don't have to kind of micromanage throughout. I can kind of let it do its own thing. So. And I'm really releasing after every single attack. And again, staying grounded, having good core strength, and just trying to let the physical body be open. Now here, trying to get this sense of we've arrived at fortissimo, which is the highest dynamic marking in this excerpt. And really going all the way down that line, since the notes fall in register, we need to make sure that we almost make a crescendo to the bottom so that we don't lose sound where it's not written. Because we do have a diminuendo in the next bar. And again, you might be feeling physically tired here. The best way to maintain articulation and clarity in this diminuendo is just shorten up the stroke, okay? So I might be using a little bit of my right hand fingers, especially the first two, the index finger and the second finger, to kind of pick the bow out of the string quicker, so it shortens that stroke. Right? I'm just really light by the end, and then start at the same dynamic. And nice release. So it's, again, this is all about bow stroke, but the sound always still has to be beautiful and resonant. So here with the slurred figures, I'm releasing that slur a little bit with the bow. I'm releasing it and I'm letting my my elbow open up. So I'm using a little bit more bow than I would for any of the rest of this excerpt. I think if I used less bow, I would get tense and the sound wouldn't be as full as it needs to be here. Try to maintain an active vibrato. You don't have to go wild here, but just so that, again, we're thinking about sound, we don't want it to sound dead in any way on these. And I go over to the G string just so I don't have to deal with awkward string crossings between eighth notes. Here. And really make that diminuendo written. You're just touching the string with your bow here. And nice sound on that sforzando, and really make that crescendo. Right? That's a powerful and surprising gesture, and you want to bring that out. Now, in concerning rhythm and tempo and pulse, towards the end here, because there are all these quarter note rests written in, it's easy to kind of lose our sense of pulse. So again, that metronome technique I mentioned at the beginning of the excerpt is really helpful here, so that we're always maintaining a kind of sub-pulse, our offbeat pulse. We always want to be kind of subdividing and feeling that just as strongly, if not more strong, than the downbeat of each bar. So maintaining this stroke, practicing under tempo so that you can really practice in how to release your upper body while having great articulation. It's really important with this excerpt. So by the time you get to this fortissimo section towards the end, you still have some strength left to play this with great articulation and good sound. So always just you can be led by the sound that you hear in between the notes, in between the attacks. And if that sounds full and rich and warm, I think you're probably on a good track physically. Because if we're tense and if everything is tightening up here, there's less sound and it's more crunchy in between the notes. So even for kind of staying open and feeling physically free, sound can really be a really good indicator of what's going on, both technically and physically. So just try to keep that in mind. Try to stay open as much as possible with this one. And last tip is record yourself a lot with this excerpt. You will learn, immediately kind of what is going on. Some things may be going really well, and some things may need more work than you expected. But recording yourself is super important for all the reasons we discussed: sound, articulation, and tempo. So good luck, happy practicing, and I look forward to seeing you for the next edition of An Excerpt a Day.